The day I walked out of the courtroom, I had exactly $72 left in my account. From being the executive of an AI company worth $480 million, I had become a tenant in a freezing apartment in Tacoma, eating ramen noodles, sleeping beside cardboard boxes, and watching the news, calling me a dangerous man who controlled his wife with technology. My wife got everything: 3 houses, 2 Tesla cars, $9.4 million in cash, and both of our children. And me? A locked bank card and a verdict I was never allowed to challenge. But justice is not dead. It is only silent, watching to see if I have the patience to wait for its return. If you have ever had something taken from you, been cornered, yet kept silent, stay until the end of this story, because you'll see that silence isn't surrender. It's the stage before justice speaks. And if you believe dignity can't be confiscated, leave a single dot in the comments to let me know you, too, have once stood alone and refused to bow. Follow this channel, turn on notifications, because every week I'll tell you a true story, where good people don't just survive, they prevail. Justice doesn't shout, it arrives. The sound of the gavel echoed through the courtroom, dry, heavy, like a gunshot ending 40 years of a man's life. I looked up. The fluorescent light above reflected off the glass in front of me, making everything look white, so white I couldn't tell where people ended and shadows began. The judge read the verdict in a flat tone, as if she had repeated the same sentence 1,000 times. The court grants all requests of the plaintiff, Mrs. Melissa Warren. This judgment is not a temporary ruling. It is a final decree of dissolution, the final divorce decree of the state of Washington, including property division and immediate transfer of ownership. There is no parenting plan because the children are adults. The remaining dispute involves only assets and reputation. The courtroom was silent except for the scratching of pens and my heartbeat going off rhythm. 3 houses, one on Bainbridge Island, one in Kirkland, and a penthouse overlooking Elliott Bay. All Tesla vehicles, the remaining shares in Warren Dynamics, and every joint account totaling $9.4 million. All transferred to her. The accompanying orders included property and vehicle transfers within 30 days, a QDRO order for all retirement-related accounts, and a freeze on all Warren-named accounts until completion. On paper, I was officially assetless after divorce. I sat there listening as the verdict was read slowly, each word cutting like a blade. And symbolic guardianship of the 2 adult children, Clara and Nathan, is recommended to remain. I smirked. Symbolic guardianship? My children were 30 and 28, far beyond guardianship. But I understood. The line wasn't for the law, it was for the public, for the final blow to a father's dignity. Across the aisle, Melissa sat upright. Blonde hair, simple black dress, lightly made-up face. If one didn't know the story, they'd think she was the victim. And me, a 70-year-old man in a worn gray suit, accused of being a controller, a psychological abuser, a financial manipulator. Local media called me the engineer of control. Every accusation was delivered in polished legal terms, painted with fake tears and paid witnesses. I looked toward the first 2 rows where my children sat. Clara bowed her head, tears welling, but never turned back. Nathan, the son I once taught to hold his first microchip, the one who spent nights with me debugging projects, avoided my eyes, scribbling notes like a detached observer. I expected at least one word. Dad. A protest, a look of pity, but nothing. My lawyer, Mr. Harris, touched my shoulder, signaling stay calm. Calm? How can a man just erased from his life by a few sheets of paper stay calm? I was used to the sounds of keyboards, servers humming overnight, printers signing contracts, but never a sound as brutal as the gavel today. The court clerk looked up at me, a middle-aged woman with an odd gaze, not pity, not contempt, the look of someone who knows something but cannot speak. Our eyes met for a second before she bent down, writing something into the record. A small seed of truth just fell. But I didn't yet know it. The judge closed the file, voice cold as steel. My attorney whispered, "If you want to appeal, you have 30 days, but the deposit fee will kill us." I understood. No money, no expert witnesses, no appeal, just a locked glass door. Court adjourned. Melissa stood first. She turned to her lawyer, Eric Dalton, the man who once had lunch at Warren Dynamics, once called me a pioneer of green tech. He bowed politely, as if he hadn't just stolen another man's wife. Then Melissa looked at me. That look I will never forget. She smiled. Not the smile of victory, but of someone who has destroyed a soul and knows the other will never rise again. That smile was cold, sharp, flawless, a perfect cut on ice. As she and Eric walked out, cameras flashed. Melissa Warren, the woman who stood up to tech power. Headlines were ready. I heard the courtroom door close, the metal latch clicking softly. A small sound, yet enough to end 40 years of life. I stayed seated, gripping the file, not to keep the assets, but to hold on to the feeling that I still existed. No one looked at me anymore. The courtroom emptied, leaving only the white light reflecting off the cold tile floor. I took a deep breath and stood. Each step echoed hollow. As I passed the clerk's desk, I caught a glimpse of a paper, half hidden under her hand. Tiny pencil writing, "Not everyone believes them." I didn't understand, only nodded and walked on. Outside, the March wind from Puget Sound blew through the courthouse hallway. I looked up at Seattle's gray, rain-dotted sky and exhaled. In the wind, I thought I heard Melissa's voice. "You lost." And yes, I had lost. Completely. But I remember, when I turned to leave, light from the window hit her face, and for that instant, Melissa's smile glowed, radiant, cruel, perfect beyond reality. A smile I will never forget for the rest of my life. Before everything fell apart, I used to believe my life was a perfect blueprint, a system in which every line of code, every circuit board, every idea was programmed by reason and faith. I was born in Tacoma, the son of a welder and an elementary school teacher. My father once said, "Technology is humanity's new bridge. It connects people, not divides them." I didn't understand it then, but years later, I lived entirely by that belief and collapsed because of it. I started as a hardware engineering intern in a chip factory in Seattle, working 12-hour days and studying programming at night. I wrote my first lines of code on an old borrowed laptop, white text blinking on a black screen like the only light in that rented room. From a server maintenance technician, I became a project engineer, then a research lead. At 32, after 10 years in cold laboratories, I founded Warren Dynamics, a tech company specializing in AI for infrastructure monitoring and urban automation. Everyone called me crazy back then, but I believed in what others couldn't see, that technology could make the world run more fairly and transparently. The first 3 years were hell. I coded, pitched to investors, and fixed routers at midnight. Some winter nights, I sat alone in the office lit only by server lights reflecting off the desk, listening to the steady hum of CPU fans as if they were my own heartbeat. Then the first project succeeded, a smart harbor sensor system that saved the city 40% in maintenance costs. The press wrote, "The man who taught AI to understand steel." From that moment, Warren Dynamics rose to become the symbol of Western tech infrastructure. When I turned 40, the company had over 100 engineers and a 3-story headquarters overlooking Lake Union. I kept the same motto carved into the lobby wall, integrity over money. I told everyone, if one wrong line of code could pass an audit but break our ethics, delete it. Better to lose a contract than lose honor. During a product launch, I met Melissa. She was a user interface designer invited as an aesthetic consultant for our control dashboard. The day she walked in wearing a white blouse and thin glasses, I spilled coffee over my report. She laughed, didn't scold me, and said, "Finally, someone here dares to make a mistake." That simple line made a room full of machines feel like it had a heartbeat. We married a year later, on a grassy field in Bainbridge Island, surrounded by sea salt and waves. When Melissa walked toward me, holding lavender, the sunset glinting in her blue eyes, I knew that if anything lasted longer than technology, it was love. Years later, Clara and Nathan were born. They grew up among screens and circuits, learning Python before they could tell left from right. At night, Melissa would lull them to sleep with jazz music while I sat nearby, writing more code for the Neural Port AI project, a deep learning system that predicted failures in harbors and power grids. That was when I thought I was invincible. A company, a reputation, a family, a love. The villa by Elliott Bay I bought when we signed our 50th contract. It had glass walls, an automated lighting system I programmed myself, and a voice-controlled climate AI tuned to Melissa's tone. I once joked, "This house will run forever, even if I'm gone." She smiled, resting her hand on my shoulder. "As long as you remember to live inside it." I thought she was teasing. Now I realize it was a warning. The more successful I became, the further I drifted from her. The deeper I dove into projects, the more I believed love could be sustained by logic, like clean code that runs perfectly and needs no debugging. Melissa disagreed. She wanted presence, not performance. One night she looked straight at me, calm but cold. "You believe in algorithms, not people." I laughed, thinking she was being emotional. I didn't know that was the first crack in what I thought was a flawless system. That autumn, Warren Dynamics signed a major contract with a San Francisco investment fund. I worked so much that I slept at the office, living on coffee and protein bars. Melissa began leaving early and coming home late, saying she was coordinating legal files for the project. One evening, when I asked who she was working with, she answered, "Someone very good at tech law. Eric Dalton. He's an expert in intellectual property and said he could help me review the contracts." I nodded without looking up from my screen, thinking she just wanted help. I didn't know that at that very moment, the line of code that would rewrite my life had been entered. The screen light shone on my face, while her shadow stretched across the wall. 2 worlds, 2 languages, 2 rhythms. A quiet night, yet within that silence, a piece of code had already started to run wrong. Silently, irreversibly. That night, I came home early, a rare thing. The Neural Port AI project had just completed its test phase, and the engineers planned to go out celebrating, but I used fatigue as an excuse to leave first. I didn't know why. Maybe instinct. That vague feeling like when you know your code has a bug but can't yet find which line it's on. I just wanted to go home, play some soft music, pour a glass of wine, and have a quiet dinner with Melissa. We had been apart for too long. The villa by the bay glowed with warm yellow light when I opened the door. The scent of pine wood and her faint perfume lingered, the mix of bergamot and cedarwood. I had given her for our 10th anniversary. I set my keys on the table and called softly, "Mel, I'm home." No reply. Piano music drifted from the living room speakers, Debussy's Clair de Lune, the piece she only played when she wanted peace. I walked down the hallway past the wall of family photos, Clara as a child holding her self-built robot, Nathan grinning at his graduation. My chest tightened at those faces. In recent months, the only things in our home that still smiled were the pictures. I reached the door to her studio. The frosted glass panel engraved Melissa's studio. Inside, the desk lamp cast a soft beam across the gray rug. She was sitting there, leaning back in her chair, hair falling loose, laptop open, a glass of red wine beside her. On her lips was a smile I hadn't seen in a long time, gentle, relaxed, but meant for someone else. Then I heard her voice. "No, he doesn't suspect anything." Her tone was quiet, but crisp, each word clear, as if I was listening through the high-fidelity mic of the very system I had built. "Yes, I know, just a few more weeks. Everything will be transferred to my name. Yes, Warren Dynamics, the house, everything. She paused, then laughed softly. A sweet, warm sound so strange it made my skin prickle. You're amazing, Eric. I love you. The world tilted. I froze outside the door. My hand clenched so hard the knuckles turned white. The faintest sounds, the glass touching the table, the wine rippling, cut like shards. I didn't burst in, didn't scream, didn't break anything. I just stepped back, like a mechanic realizing a bolt had come loose but not daring to touch it, because I knew, if I entered that room, everything would explode. I turned away and quietly left the house. The door clicked shut behind me, a small sound that in my head echoed like the ceiling of a massive mechanical gate, locking away everything I had ever believed in. Outside, Seattle rain thickened. I drove along Aurora Avenue, past lines of lights reflected on the wet asphalt like streaks of golden blood. The rain blurred everything, signs, signals, even memory. I turned on the wipers, but they couldn't clear what was fading inside me, the image of the woman I loved whispering, "I love you," to someone else. I stopped beneath the Aurora Bridge, looking out at the still black water of Lake Union. The sky was starless, with only faint city lights glowing against the clouds. I sat there, holding my wedding ring, the titanium band I had chosen carefully, engraved inside with the words, "Still us." My fingers trembled, not from cold, but from realizing those two words were now a lie. I clenched the ring in my palm. 1 second, 2, then opened the car door and stepped out. Wind from the lake blew up, carrying air as cold as steel. I looked at the bridges glowing across Seattle, the structures I had helped design, monuments to my belief that everything could be connected, if precise enough. But tonight, those bridges marked the boundary between the man I once was and the one I was about to become. I threw the ring into the water, a faint sound barely audible, then gone into the rain. Ripples spread, fading like a line of code deleted from a system. I watched until nothing remained. When I returned to the car, I still hadn't cried. People only cry when they still have hope. I felt only a hollow space in my chest, cold as unfinished metal. As rain drummed steadily against the windshield, I heard her old words echo in my head. "You believe in algorithms, not people." Maybe she was right, because when people betray you, they are crueler than any algorithm could ever be. I started the car and drove into the night, leaving behind the sound of rain tapping against the Aurora Bridge, like the heartbeat of a city that never sleeps, and of a man who just lost his reason to believe in love. From the moment Melissa whispered in her studio until now, everything unfolded like a program running on auto-execute. No room for emotion, only steps, forms, and evidence lined up in cold precision. Eric Dalton revealed himself not as a gentle lover, but as a legal engineer, sitting upright, speaking slowly, placing each piece of evidence on the table like labeled microchips. "Mr. Warren is a controller," he said before the camera and the judge. "He doesn't just manage finances, he manipulates emotions, isolates his wife, and forces her to use joint accounts as tools of restraint. This is a textbook case of financial coercion." They presented a psychological report with an authoritative title, signed by an expert witness, a forensic psychologist who appeared on professional magazine covers. She described controlling behaviors in sympathetic language and declared that the victim lived in constant stress. Passages from the report, read aloud in court, sounded like commands. Prolonged stress indicators, post-traumatic stress disorder, patterns consistent with coercive control. Combined with photocopied contracts, signed under pressure, and edited emails made to look threatening, the picture Eric painted was flawless. From the prior temporary orders, they accelerated the process toward a final decree. Everything followed procedures so perfectly that there was no financial oxygen left for me to breathe. Another expert, a man introduced as a forensic analyst, stood to deliver a technical breakdown of system logs and IoT data from the smart home. They interpreted temperature commands, camera access logs, and door timestamps, and used them to prove that I monitored Melissa's every move. Numbers, graphs, and code that once made me proud became blades slicing through my own creation. The media, hungry for drama, swarmed like moths to a flame. Headlines screamed, "Control freak engineer! How one tech CEO allegedly turned love into surveillance." Those words turned me into a public villain. TV news. Cut together clips of me in labs, eyes fixed on screens while reporters repeated, "Were his inventions used to control his family?" Oops. Online comments poured salt on the wound. How could someone so brilliant be so cruel? My children, the ones who once slept in labs as toddlers, now stood under courtroom lights saying words that shattered me. Clara spoke of sleepless nights filled with fear, of messages she believed were threats. Nathan, whom I taught to read technical documents, stood tall and said he could no longer accept how I treated them. They didn't defend me. They chose her side. I looked at them through the safety goggles of my life and saw strangers, not my children anymore. While the hearing moved like a pre-written sequence, consequences fell fast and mercilessly. A major partner of Warren Dynamics, fearing media fallout, suspended all contracts the next day. The board held an emergency meeting and forced me to step down as CEO. The court's asset freeze order left me unable to access any joint accounts. Even my small personal funds were blocked to ensure judgment execution and attorney fees for the prevailing party. Every financial exit is closed to protect shareholder interests. The bank, under standard legal protocol and allegations, froze both company and personal accounts, halted all transfers, and disabled credit cards. The day before, I was the man who unlocked every security gate. Now I had to call, verify documents, and watch each administrative order rise before me like invisible barriers. There was no scene of rage or destruction. The loss came through paperwork, seals, signatures, precise, smooth, final. I was stripped of access to my own code base, locked out of the servers I had built over 2 decades. Every email, every repo, every commit, now evidence against me, or at least data for others to exploit. My emotions didn't crash. They plunged into a bottomless pit. From the chill I'd felt before, I fell into a space where every minute stretched like a century, aching, hopeless, betrayed. I remember sitting in the garage, gripping the steering wheel, the red glow of the dashboard blinking like the final breaths of a system shutting down. I tried calling my lawyer, friends, anyone, but the calls rang out, unanswered. Everyone saw me as a problem to be managed, not a man breaking apart. When I returned to the Bayfront house, once my refuge, now an alien structure, the iron gate was locked. A small sign hung above. Transfer of ownership filed. I had gone from owner to uninvited guest. From the gate, I saw my reflection in the glass, an intruder on someone else's property. Property sealed, by court order. I stood there, staring at the cold metal lock. The gate that once opened for me, for workers, for family gatherings, now shut like a sentence. I trembled, not from cold, but from realizing the truth. Even this gate no longer recognized me. It stood there, silent, dividing me from everything that once belonged to me. I bowed my head, feeling small beneath Seattle's gray sky. Even the gate doesn't recognize me anymore, I thought, and that line echoed in my head like a failed command loop. The absolute bottom embraced me, deep, cold, endless, and in that moment, amid rain and city lights, I understood that if I ever wanted to return, I'd have to reclaim not just my assets, but my stolen identity. After the verdict, I left Seattle. Not in a luxury car, not with a leather suitcase, but with an old canvas bag carrying a few clothes and a laptop stripped of access to the company system. All my bank accounts were frozen within 24 hours. Legally, I was divorced. The final decree took effect immediately. The marital estate was divided completely under the judgment based on their expert reports. I received nothing but the right to appeal on paper. Any attempt to withdraw living expenses risked being deemed an obstruction of enforcement. My shares in Warren Dynamics were held by the court for further investigation, and every personal asset was jointly titled with Melissa, meaning I couldn't touch a dime. Credit cards were void. Savings accounts held only a few $100s, while legal bills, rent, and court fees kept arriving. I had once approved millions with a nod, yet now I counted coins for a Starbucks coffee. The man who once led hundreds of AI engineers now cleans warehouses for an old electronics shop. I worked manual labor, carrying boxes, fixing pipes, changing bulbs. Hands that once signed $1 million contracts were now cracked and calloused. $300 a week, just enough for rent and instant noodles. In America, cheap noodles that fill you up are top ramen, bought by the box at discount stores. I once sponsored lunches for an entire floor of engineers. Now I counted noodle packs like CPU cycles. I lived each day like a piece of abandoned code, still running but with no purpose. I kept my old habits, waking early, making instant coffee at 6, opening my laptop, typing meaningless commands just to feel alive. Then I tried calling my children. The first time, Clara didn't answer. The second, Nathan did, his voice cold as steel. "Dad, I think it's better if you leave Mom alone. The media's said enough. Don't make things worse." I tried to say, "Son, I didn't do anything wrong. But all I heard was a click. The call ended. The screen flashed, "Call ended," like a failed command. The next afternoon, passing a newsstand near the bus stop, I saw Melissa and Eric Dalton on the cover of Pacific Business Review. The headline read, "The New Power Couple of Seattle Tech, Love, Vision, and Reinvention." Beneath it was a photo from Warren Dynamics' new product launch, the company that had been my life's work. They smiled, hand in front of the LED screen, showing the logo I had designed. The caption read, "Eric Dalton, new CEO, with his indispensable partner, designer Melissa Warren." I folded the magazine and dropped it in the trash, but the image burned in my mind. She wore the emerald dress I once gave her for our 15th anniversary. On her wrist was the Apple Watch I'd engraved, "To my forever partner." Everything that had been mine now adorned someone else. That night, rain beat on the tin roof like misfired keystrokes. I sat in darkness, the room lit only by the pale blue glow of my computer. I tried to type a farewell letter, broken sentences not for anyone to read, just to remind myself I had once existed. "If someday someone asks why," I wrote, "tell them he trusted the wrong person but still believed in justice." I stopped, my hand trembling. Before I could finish the last line, tears fell onto the keyboard. I don't know how long passed before dawn bled through the curtains. I decided to clean up, partly to kill time, partly because I didn't want the room to mirror my defeat any longer. I opened an old cardboard box where I'd thrown mixed papers, family photos, broken parts, and then I found it. A light blue booklet, edges worn, embossed with the logo of First National Trust. The faded text, reading, "Edward Warren, account number 311452, opened 1951. I chuckled softly and shook my head. My grandfather, Edward Warren, had been a ship mechanic. I vaguely remembered my father saying he once had a savings account at a local bank, where he deposited a few dollars each month. When he passed, my father said it had long been closed. I'd never thought about it again. I opened the booklet. The numbers were handwritten in blue ink, quick but steady. The last entry was May 23rd, 1952. Deposit, $50. Then nothing. $50. On the final page was his signature, Edward Warren. I ran my finger across the faded ink, as if shaking hands with someone from another time. A strange thought flickered through my mind. I wonder if this account still exists? I laughed at myself. Asking about a 70-year-old account, any banker would think I was insane. Yet, In the thick fog of despair, that tiny thought made my heart beat faster. I placed the booklet on the table, staring out at the neon light reflecting off the wet street. Tomorrow, I told myself, I'll close this account. Maybe there's still $50 left, enough for the last piece of dignity of a man who once had everything. I turned off the light. The room sank into darkness, with only the sound of steady rain, like a promise yet to be spoken. The next morning, Tacoma was still gray, the drizzle falling as if the city had forgotten what sunlight looked like. I put on my old coat, slipped the faded blue savings book into my inner pocket, and stepped out of the small apartment. The First National Trust branch was less than 2 blocks away, but I walked slowly, not from fatigue, but because I wasn't sure what I was doing. Maybe I just wanted to see something left from the past, a sign that the Warren name had existed before I was erased from every record. The bank was old. The bronze sign was tarnished, the glass door etched with the words, "Since 1899. Inside, the scent of polished wood and floor cleaner mixed, carrying me back to childhood memories of walking with my father to collect his weekly pay. I approached the counter and set the booklet down. The young teller, her brown hair tied up neatly, looked at me politely. "Good morning, sir. How can I help you?" I smiled faintly. "You probably can't. I just want to check on an old account. A very old one." I pushed the booklet toward her. She flipped through it, frowning slightly. "This was opened in 1951? I've never seen one of these." "Neither had I until last night," I said. "It belonged to my grandfather, Edward Warren. I just wanted to know if the bank still has any record of it." She nodded, smiling with that blend of curiosity and empathy, then began typing. The computer's blue light reflected off her face. A few seconds passed. "This is interesting, Mr. Warren. The account was never closed." I froze. "What did you say?" "Yes, the system shows it's still active. We migrated legacy accounts to the electronic database in 1983. It appears someone has been depositing small, regular interest payments ever since. Tiny amounts, but consistent for 70 years. I sat upright, my heart pounding. Who could have done that? My grandfather died in 1968. The teller looked at me, her expression now careful. "I'm not allowed to disclose who maintains it, but the account is marked as a family continuation fund. It's linked to an entity, Warren Dynamics Holding LLC. I could barely breathe. Warren Dynamics? But that company, it was mine, at least before it was transferred. She tilted her head slightly. "You might want to speak with our branch manager. This file includes an attached addendum." She guided me into a small office behind the counter. The walls were lined with framed bank awards, a clock showing 10:07 a.m. The branch manager, a tall man with silver hair and a gray suit, entered. He shook my hand, then placed a sealed yellow envelope on the desk, marked with a red wax seal. "You're Alex Warren?" "Yes." "Good. This document has been in our vault. It's to be released only to a verified member of the Warren family. According to our records, the signer was your grandfather." My hands trembled as I broke the seal. Inside was a folded page, the ink pale but the handwriting unmistakable, tilted, firm, the same signature I remembered from old photos. "If you're reading this, it means the Warren line has fallen once again. Don't fear it. Every generation of ours has faced ruin and rebuilt from ashes. This account is not just money. It's a reminder that justice does not sleep and honor does not die. Within Warren Dynamics lies a hidden circuit, a silent ownership. If anyone ever tries to steal it, remember, the true founder always leaves a trace." Edward Warren, May 1951. I read it 3 times. A hidden circuit, a silent ownership. The words hit me like a current. I understood immediately, not about the money, but about legacy. My grandfather had laid the first engineering foundation for the infrastructure automation project I later developed into Warren Dynamics. He'd filed a prototype patent for a harbor sensor system in 1950, meaning the intellectual property might still be under his name. And if so, the core technology of the company couldn't have been legally transferred without a direct heir's signature. I looked up. "Excuse me, can I see the account balance?" The manager gave a faint smile and handed me a printout. The final line made me gasp. "Balance, 2,173 USD, accumulated through compound interest and family continuation fund since 1983. I couldn't speak. $2,451,000. A dormant account, 70 years old, still growing from the original family trust. The manager said gently, "The funds remain intact. Only the direct heir may withdraw. But you should know, the records also list you as the inheritor of an original patent prototype for infrastructure sensors, a 1950, 1951, the basis of later predictive AI models. If I were you, I'd consult a good tech attorney." I nodded, throat tight. For the first time in months, I felt gravity return to my body, as if the ground had stopped collapsing. When I stepped outside, Tacoma's rain hadn't stopped, but it no longer felt cold. I stood under the awning, watching people pass, my hand gripping the weathered blue booklet. In my mind, everything began to run again, like a system rebooting after a long shutdown. I whispered to myself, "Justice does not sleep." And in that moment, I knew. The game wasn't over. After the day at the bank, something in me changed. It was not the irrational excitement of a lottery winner. It was a cold clarity, like a ship repairing its sails after a storm, checking its compass, and resetting course. I knew I had a rare legal advantage most people would not think of, my grandfather's intellectual legacy and the family account. But that advantage was only the beginning of the story. Tragedy does not itself build strategy. Strategy requires time, craft, and absolute discretion. I began by making myself invisible. For 2 weeks, I moved like a ghost through the city. I met a few old acquaintances, but no one knew my true purpose. I set up a shell company, Harborstone Holdings, LLC, a bland name that aroused no suspicion, with a registered address at a small service office on the Tacoma waterfront. No ostentation was needed. The purpose was not to flaunt wealth, but to conceal the next moves, to buy a small property in a strategic location, a place for discreet meetings, where lawyers and investigators could gather without being trailed. Buying real estate through a shell company in the United States is legal, and if done carefully, few notice, especially when funds are transferred from a legitimate personal account. I used the cash I had left, supplemented by a safe transfer from a held account that the bank allowed for minimal living expenses, a legal procedure that can be requested from the court on humanitarian grounds. The apartment was not a penthouse. It was a loft facing the harbor, with wide windows looking out over the old cranes. I liked it for its humility and its view, looking at operations, at movement, like an engineer appraising a system. Next, I did the most important thing. I hired experts. I called a number my voice knew by heart. Robert Kingsley, the name I had heard in many versions of my life. Robert was a lawyer who specialized in malpractice and litigation against corrupt attorneys. He had an uncompromising reputation and a list of victories, long enough to make opponents nervous. I did not want a sympathetic defense. I needed a precise legal strike. Robert came to the loft office, looked me in the eye, and said one sentence. "You don't want to be the man who was knocked down anymore. You want to be the strategist." I nodded. Robert worked mechanically but effectively, planning, delegating, anticipating. He advised patience, secrecy, and collecting everything before striking. "If we act before public sentiment is ready," he said, "they will invent enough stories. If we strike when everything is exposed, public opinion will be an ally." I marked it in my head. Wait for the right moment. Wait for the crowd to look at them. That would be when they were most vulnerable. Procedurally, Robert chose 2 prongs. 1, a motion to vacate the divorce decree for fraud on the court. fraud that distorted the legal process. And 2, a malpractice anti-fraud civil suit seeking a constructive trust and restitution to recover assets to their rightful owner. He also coordinated with the prosecutor's office and federal authorities. A criminal filing first would act as a spotlight for the civil case. Robert introduced me to a private investigator he trusted absolutely, someone unobtrusive named Marcus Hale, a former economic crimes detective now working as a PI. Marcus began by digging into Eric Dalton's records. What he found left the legal team speechless. Eric was not merely a rising lawyer. He was an architect of a legal scam network. Marcus enumerated 7 similar divorces over 10 years, all sharing the same pattern. An expert witness of questionable repute, psychological reports that were adjusted, a few witnesses appearing at precisely the right moment, and a network of forensic analysts hired to make technical data favor Eric's client. In each case, Marcus traced hidden accounts, shell companies, and disguised transfers. He interviewed former victims in silence, gathered sworn statements, backed up emails, photographed evidence, and preserved metadata. A woman in Arizona wept as she recounted how they had destroyed her life for the sake of a modest house. A man in Portland said he had to sell his shop to pay legal fees after a forged signature could not be disproved. The chain of evidence emerged like a map. Eric knew how to bend the system, and he had done it many times. In closed meetings, Robert and Marcus laid out what they needed: the falsified medical records Eric used, contracts with forged signatures, metadata proving file edits, and above all, victims willing to testify. They were clear. We don't need to burn them now. We need to build a legal trap he will confidently jump into. I smiled. For the first time, it was a planned smile, not the grin of a man defeated. Meanwhile, I continued my role as the invisible billionaire. I kept a very low public profile. I attended a few tech talks, not as CEO, but as a retired co-founder invited to speak about AI safety. I took modest honoraria to fund the team's operations. I hired data analysts to comb through the Warren Dynamics logs I still had. They looked for places where my grandfather's old code could form the basis for intellectual property claims. Sometimes I went near my old company, never into the offices, just standing at a distance watching the glass building, now called the Melissa and Eric Alliance. It felt strange, like viewing an occupied body while mapping corridors for a secret entry. Every move was shielded by counsel, every transfer routed through Harborstone. I learned to use invisibility as a strategic tool, appear little, but make each action aim at a clear objective. Robert warned, "You don't need the public now. You need the public at the moment we choose." In my mind, the court, the press, and TV lights were being positioned like chess pieces. My emotions were no longer jagged as in the beginning. A peculiar warmth crept in, not irrational joy, but methodical restoration. From the abyss, I began to climb step by step. A discreet loft, a shell company, a skilled lawyer, a PI unafraid to get his hands dirty. I began to see myself as a player, not prey. The old vessel was being repaired, and I was the captain. The night before the team prepared to file the first briefs with the prosecutor's office, we sat in the loft. Robert spread a summary on the table. Marcus made a round of calls. Witnesses had agreed to cooperate. Technical evidence had been hashed and backed up, and financial transactions were wired for traceability. I closed my eyes, inhaled, and for the first time in so long, I said what not everyone could hear me say: "We'll strike when the crowd is watching." The phrase echoed in the room, carrying the certainty of a thoroughly prepared plan, and I knew that when that moment came, when the crowd watched, when their reputation had already collapsed under public scrutiny, our blow would not only reclaim assets, it would be the answer to all the laughs that humiliated me, and to everyone who believed silence meant the end. We'll strike when the crowd is watching. When the public witnesses the truth unveiled, the civil court will have grounds to reopen the case. Assets transferred through fraud will no longer be safe. 1 year after the verdict, the waterfront mansion that had once been my home blazed with lights as if no tragedy had ever touched it. A jazz band played Fly Me to the Moon. Laughter drifted across the garden. Crystal glasses chimed, blending with the soft waves of Elliott Bay. On the stage in the main hall, Melissa and Eric Dalton stood hand in hand, smiling beneath a white neon sign. 1 year of love and innovation. Warren Dynamics Anniversary Gala. 120 guests, figures from finance, technology, journalism, and politics, mingled under the shimmer of chandeliers and the polished walnut floor. They weren't just celebrating the love of Seattle's golden couple. They were honoring a year of triumph for Warren Dynamics, now run by Eric. The speeches, the toast, the smiles, all choreographed like a luxury commercial. Melissa wore a silver-white silk gown, a diamond necklace glittering at her collarbone. She raised her glass, voice brimming with pride. Thank you all for believing in us. Today isn't just our anniversary. It's proof that love and technology can redefine the future together. Applause thundered. Local TV cameras panned across the room, capturing every smile, every champagne flute flashing under the lights. Eric wrapped an arm around her shoulders, his lips tightening in a calculated smile. None of them knew the lights were about to go out. While the band shifted to Autumn Leaves, 3 black SUVs pulled up quietly outside. Doors opened. Agents in black jackets marked FBI stepped out, followed by prosecutors from the King County District Attorney's Office. They moved through a side entrance where a catering staffer, actually an undercover agent, had unlocked the gate. Inside, the music still played. The trumpet mingled with the sound of rain. 9:47 p.m. The chandeliers flickered. The audio system cut off. For a heartbeat, the hall fell into strange silence, broken only by the rain outside. Then a voice rang over the microphone, firm, cold, precise. Eric Dalton, Melissa Warren, you are under arrest for federal financial fraud, falsification of legal records, and obstruction of justice. This warrant is issued by the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Washington. Chaos erupted. Gasps, shouts. Eric spun around, his face draining of color. Melissa stepped back, clutching her glass. An agent strode onto the stage, reading the warrant while 2 others closed in. "This is a mistake," Melissa screamed, her voice cracking. "No, this is revenge. We're innocent." Her words dissolved into noise. The glass slipped from her hand, shattering on the floor. Fragments of crystal reflected the stage lights across her tear-streaked, powdered face. Eric tried to steady himself, raising a hand. "I'm an attorney. I have the right." "You have the right to remain silent," the agent interrupted, and the metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the room. Cameras were still rolling. A KCT news reporter lifted his phone, live streaming. The clip lasted 2.5 minutes, but by midnight it had millions of views. Seattle's golden couple arrested live at anniversary gala. At the same time, Robert filed a notice of newly discovered evidence with the family court. The arrests formed the foundation for the motion to vacate and for reverse asset freeze orders against properties transferred 1 year earlier. Online, the comments poured in, "Justice may be slow, but it doesn't sleep. A year ago, they took everything from him. Tonight, they lost everything in front of everyone." Meanwhile, 10 miles away in a small loft overlooking the Tacoma Harbor, I sat at a wooden desk, holding a cup of black tea. The laptop screen cast its light across my face. On it played the live broadcast, Melissa being led out of the ballroom, Eric lowering his head, the handcuffs glinting beneath the camera flashes. The banner below read, "Breaking news! Fraud and evidence tampering at Warren Dynamics exposed." My phone rang. It was Robert Kingsley. "It's done. The DA confirmed the judgment will expand. Eric's entire case history is being reopened. He won't walk away from this. And once the temporary injunction hits," Robert said, We'll have the main assets listed as in dispute. After that, it's just accounting and Truth. I nodded. Truth finally had counsel. I smiled. Good. Don't let them buy silence with bail. Robert chuckled softly. You know, I've never seen anyone win this big by sitting still. I looked out the window, rain streaking the glass, reflecting distant lights, and said quietly, almost to myself, Justice doesn't need to shout. It just needs to arrive on time. I set down the phone, took a sip of tea, feeling the warmth spread through my throat, mixing with a calm I hadn't known in years. Outside, the faint sound of sirens faded. Seattle sank into the night, but for me, the light of justice had just turned on. That morning, Seattle was unusually bright, and so was the courtroom at the King County Superior Court. It wasn't a new trial, but a rare special session convened to review a motion to vacate due to fraud on the court, a petition to nullify the previous divorce decree on grounds of fraud during litigation. Robert had filed it just hours after the FBI arrested Melissa and Eric at the gala. The purpose of this hearing wasn't to redistribute assets, but to determine whether last year's judgment had been issued on falsified evidence. If the court confirmed fraud, every ruling tied to it would be void, and justice, at least on paper, would be rewritten from the beginning. The courtroom no longer glared with press lights as it had during the divorce. Instead, soft white light reflected on the walnut panels, making the space feel calm, precise, like a lab before a test run. I sat where I once had as the defendant, but my posture was different now. Back straight, breathing steady, hands resting on a folder marked in blue. Robert leaned over and whispered, We're not here to argue. We're here to measure. I nodded. Justice today would be a measurement. The petitioner's side was empty. Melissa was in federal custody. Eric had been excused due to parallel legal proceedings. The new judge, Honorable Patel, peered over her thin-framed glasses and spoke evenly. This court convenes to review newly discovered evidence indicating potential litigation fraud, falsified expert testimony, and tampering with court records. Robert began his presentation like a systems engineer, running diagnostics. Your Honor, we will demonstrate 3 layers of fraud. Layer 1, the psychological expert report was plagiarized, copied and altered from another case. Layer 2, the forensic analyst manipulated metadata from the smart home system to fabricate a narrative of surveillance. Layer 3, the most severe. The court was deceived through an internal communication breach. A scheduling email from the previous clerk's inbox was replaced at the last minute, removing our rebuttal motion from the docket. He laid 3 binders on the table, each sealed with a chain of custody tag. We'll let the witness explain, he said, gesturing toward the door. It opened, and the former court clerk, the same woman whose sympathetic glance I remembered from Part 1, stepped in. She placed her hand on the Bible, took the oath, and after a brief look at me, turned toward the judge. Your Honor, she said, her voice raspy but clear, the night before last year's hearing, I received an email chain from eric.dalton.law to the court's main inbox requesting a schedule adjustment for the psychological expert due to courtroom congestion. That was routine, so I replied approving the shift to the following morning. But the next day, when I checked the system, I found another message in the same chain, titled Revised Schedule, timestamp 2:14 a.m., appearing as if sent by me. That message reordered the docket, pushing Mr. Warren's motion to strike the expert witness to the end of the session, effectively preventing the rebuttal evidence from being heard. The issue is, I never sent that email. Later, a forensic examiner confirmed traces of a reply injection. Someone inserted a forged email into the thread, making it appear in sequence as though I had sent it. That's how they suppressed the rebuttal filing and ensured the decree was issued without Mr. Warren's evidence ever being reviewed. That morning, Seattle rarely saw sunlight, and it had never seen a hearing like this. It wasn't a retrial, but a special session of the King County Superior Court convened to review a motion to vacate due to fraud on the court, a petition to nullify the prior divorce decree based on fraud committed during litigation. Robert had filed the motion within hours of the FBI arresting Melissa and Eric at the gala. The court's purpose wasn't to redivide assets, but to determine whether the prior judgment had been issued on falsified evidence. If fraud were confirmed, the entire decree would collapse, and justice, at least in writing, would start over. Robert handed the judge a printed bundle. Dickham and DMARC logs confirmed the 2:14 a.m. email was forged. The court's inbox uses two-factor authentication, but the reply injection exploit created a false entry in the thread. These are independent forensic reports from 3 firms. Judge Patel tilted her head, eyes narrowing. Signature evidence? Yes, Your Honor. Robert opened the second binder. The documents signed under duress that the petitioner submitted last year contained 4 anomalies. We call Dr. Nguyen, a forensic document examiner. A petite Asian woman took the stand and displayed magnified comparisons of Melissa's handwriting and my signature from the old stock transfer. Pressure vectors, stroke rhythm, tremor amplitude. 2 Alex Warren signatures made 4 minutes apart share identical micro-tremor frequencies to 3 decimal places, she said. That's a mechanical signing device, or a robotic pen, not a human hand. Judge Patel turned toward me. Mr. Warren, anything further? Robert lifted the third binder. Code and Intellectual Property Alignment. This is the Edward Warren Appendix, maintained by the bank since 1951, showing the original patent rights for the AI infrastructure sensor prototype. It's not directly about the divorce, but it reveals motive. The scheme to seize Warren Dynamics required a fabricated divorce decree. The courtroom fell silent. I stared at the glint of light across the table's edge, remembering the night under the Aurora Bridge. When you've thrown away the ring, the only thing left to hold is the truth. The county DA's office had joined as amicus. A young prosecutor rose. Your Honor, we are prosecuting Dalton and Associates for federal fraud, evidence fabrication, and obstruction of justice. Today's evidence aligns with our criminal case. Under Washington precedent, fraud on the court is a non-waivable basis to vacate any judgment. Judge Patel pondered, flipping through pages, marking notes in pencil, asking about the chain of custody. Robert answered smoothly, naming every custodian, every timestamp, every data hash. No theatrics, no soundtrack, only paper and the precision of law. At last she closed the file and removed her glasses. The court finds: 1. Expert testimony was plagiarized and altered. 2. Metadata was tampered with to create a false perception. 3. The hearing schedule was manipulated through a forged email. This is no longer a dispute of opinion. It is an assault on the foundation of justice. The prior divorce decree is hereby vacated due to fraud materially affecting the judgment. The gavel struck. The court orders restoration of pre-decree property status, declares all assets gained under the fraudulent judgment held in constructive trust for the lawful owner, appoints a temporary trustee to oversee transfer, enacts immediate reverse freeze orders. Assets transferred to bad faith third parties will be subject to clawback. The matter is referred to the bar's ethics committee. The sound of the gavel was not a gunshot ending. It was a lock clicking open. I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly, feeling my shoulders drop for the first time in months. Robert touched my arm, wordless, and that was enough. Outside, sunlight shimmered over Seattle's damp pavement. I stood on the courthouse steps, looking up at a turquoise sky, the same shade I'd once seen in Melissa's eyes on our wedding day. That memory no longer cut. It was a piece of glass, smoothed by time and truth. My phone vibrated. Unknown number. I answered. Dad. I'm sorry. It's Clara. Her voice trembled, then broke. I didn't check the facts. I believed the pictures, the articles. I. She paused, probably holding back tears. I'm in the courthouse parking lot. Can I see you? I looked at the stone steps where sunlight pooled like a memory. I used to pick her up from piano class there. She'd run out laughing, ink on her hands, backpack bouncing, rain forgotten. Now her voice shook through the phone, small as a crack in the air. I gripped the phone, inhaled, and answered slowly, making each word warm but steady. I'm right here, Clara. Not in the past, not in court. Here, waiting for you. 5 minutes later, Clara appeared. She hugged me, hesitant at first, then tight, as if afraid I might vanish. Her hair smelled like dry summer leaves, and for a moment I heard an invisible orchestra, the sound of a family finding its harmony again. Another call. Nathan, I put him on speaker. Dad, I'm sorry, he said plainly, firmly. I said things I'm ashamed of now. If you'll let me, I'd like to sit with you at the old workshop and just be quiet, if that's the best I can do. I smiled, not for others, but to remind myself the heart still had room for decency. Yes, Nathan, silence is also a way to speak. We sat together on the courthouse steps. Clara held my hand. Passers-by saw only 3 people after a hearing, not realizing a storm had just ended here. Dad, Clara asked, do you think we'll ever be like before? I looked at her, then at the stone worn by Judge's shoes. No, I said, we'll never be like before, but we can be kinder than before. And kindness, sometimes, is better than happiness. Clara nodded, tears falling, but her smile steady. On the line, Nathan exhaled, the sound of someone setting down a backpack made of stone. That evening, back in the loft, I laid my grandfather's blue ledger beside the court order. 2 objects, one from the past, one from the present, rested parallel like rails. In the quiet room, I could almost hear it, a faint hum, a server somewhere at Warren Dynamics still running. My company, the child once stolen, was coming home through the dry but precise language of procedure. I thought of my old engineers, the harbor projects, the motto I'd carved on the wall, integrity over money. That line had saved me, not by miracle, but by helping me stand upright when everything tried to make me kneel. My phone buzzed again, a text from Robert. Tomorrow we meet with the trustee. The rest is accounting and truth. I replied, 9 a.m., bring black coffee. Outside, Elliott Bay was ink dark. Ship lights dotted along the horizon. I stood, turned off the lamp, leaving only the faint glow of the file's edge. Justice doesn't shout. It enters like an engineer into a server room, verifying, confirming, and bringing the system back online. I closed my eyes and whispered, to my grandfather, to myself, and to the 2 children who had returned. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. Forgiveness is remembering, without hate. And that will be the story I keep for the rest of my life. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's remembering, without hate. 10 months after the divorce decree was vacated, Seattle once again became the focus of national media. But this time, I wasn't the name on the front page. The federal court of the Western District opened a public criminal trial. United States versus Eric Dalton, et al., a case the press called the collapse of the most sophisticated deceit network in tech law. The hallway outside was crowded with reporters, cameras, and the same onlookers who had followed my divorce the previous year. They weren't there to hunt a victim anymore. They came to stare at the culprits. I walked through the security gate, sunlight glinting off the courthouse glass. The feeling was both familiar and distant. A year ago, I had entered another courtroom, head bowed under a verdict I didn't deserve. Today, I was here not to demand justice for myself, but to witness how long truth could stand under the flash of the world's cameras. Inside, Eric Dalton sat at the defense table, still in a black suit, hair slicked back, but the arrogance was gone. Before him lay a stack of papers thick as a textbook of crimes. Forged emails, altered expert reports, contracts signed by mechanical pen, and records from 7 other fraud cases woven into one pattern of organized deceit. Melissa sat beside him, pale, her hands trembling. The proud woman, once radiant in silk and crystal light, was now only the shadow of a legend who deceived herself. The federal judge read the charges, her voice steady, each word like steel striking stone. Defendant Eric Dalton, you are charged with 1. Federal financial fraud. 2. Fabrication of evidence in judicial proceedings. 3. Obstruction of justice. 4. Conspiracy to unlawfully obtain property through deception. 4 counts in total, carrying a maximum penalty of 30 years. She paused, then turned to Melissa. Defendant Melissa Warren, you are charged with aiding and abetting fraud, misuse of legal process, and the use of falsified documents in a divorce proceeding for unlawful gain. The courtroom was utterly silent. Only the soft sounds of pages turning, pens scribbling, and the occasional quiet sigh of a reporter who had once written me wrong. The prosecution presented its case, video clips, metadata logs, and testimonies from former victims Marcus had found. A video played on the large screen. Eric and Melissa at the gala, speaking of the rebirth of justice, followed immediately by footage of them signing transfer contracts to shell companies. The contrast drew bitter laughter from some in the gallery. Then came the defense. Eric's new attorney tried to salvage the case by claiming it was an administrative misunderstanding. But when the prosecutor displayed time-stamped emails traced directly to Eric's private office, that argument collapsed like corrupted code. Melissa broke into tears. Eric sat motionless, staring at nothing. I didn't speak. Sitting in the third row, hands folded on my knees, I watched it unfold like an automated sequence. No need for my anger, no need for intervention. I just had to stay silent and let the system of justice do what it was built to do. After 2 days of deliberation, the jury returned. The foreman, a man with salt and pepper hair and a voice like tempered steel, stood and read the verdict. We, the jury, find defendant Eric Dalton guilty on all 4 counts. We find defendant Melissa Warren guilty on 2 of 3 counts. No cheers, no applause, only the quiet scratch of the clerk's pen signing the record. 2 weeks later, the sentences came. Eric, 22 years in federal prison. Melissa, 9. When the judge pronounced the final numbers, I saw the same glint in Melissa's eyes I had seen years ago, the flash of a winner's pride, but this time it dimmed like a dying bulb. She didn't look at me. She only lowered her head, and for the first time I believed she understood what she had truly lost. Within days, the headlines changed. The same outlets that once screamed the control freak engineer now printed the Queen of Lies, how Melissa Warren and Eric Dalton manipulated the system. They called me the man destroyed by the technology he built, but who used that same technology to reclaim justice. I gave no interviews, made no statements. I'd learned that the only explanation worth anything was time. On sentencing day, as the crowd dispersed, I stayed behind in the empty courtroom. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, dust drifting like memories that refused to settle. Robert approached and rested a hand on my shoulder. "You've won," he said. I shook my head. "No, Robert. No one wins a case like this." He said nothing. We stood, then walked out without looking back. Outside, Seattle rain began again. I raised my collar and watched droplets slide down the courthouse door's steel handle. The rain was the same, but this time I didn't run from it. I let it fall across my face, cold but clean. Behind me, reporters called my name. Cameras clicked. I didn't turn. I didn't need to. I stepped off the marble stairs into the crowd, feeling lighter, like metal finally lifted off my chest. The gavel had fallen again, but this time it hadn't ended me. It had set me free. The gavel fell again. This time it set me free. 1 year after the criminal trial, Seattle slowly returned to its ordinary rhythm. But for me, everything had turned a page. No more case tracking, no more tense meetings with lawyers, no more sleepless nights, fearing someone would again manipulate justice. For the first time in years, I woke up not out of fear, but because there was something new to do. People say revenge ends when your enemies fall, but I've learned that true justice only begins when you use your pain to save others from the same tragedy. I was no longer a CEO, no longer a disgraced father. I was simply a man who had walked through the full circle of resentment and wanted to do something decent before leaving this world. I sold my remaining shares in Warren Dynamics after restructuring the company and transferred the entire amount, $25 million, into an independent foundation called Warren Integrity Foundation. The name sounded dry, but to me, it was a promise. The foundation was registered as a non-profit organization dedicated to supporting victims of legal fraud and divorce scams, people who had lost everything because their trust was exploited. I didn't want them to become the old version of me. The foundation's office sat on the second floor of a brick building in Pioneer Square, with a laser and grawl of steel sign reading, "Where Law Meets Conscience." Every morning I sat by the window watching people pass, listening to the streetcar rumble from Jackson Street, and thinking about my grandfather Edward, the man who left me that old blue notebook like a compass. The foundation's first case came from Spokane, a 58-year-old florist named Gloria Turner. Her ex-husband and his attorney had fabricated a mental incompetence, claimed to seize her flower shop, forcing her out of the business she'd built over 20 years. I saw myself in her eyes, the helplessness of someone who once believed the law would protect her until it was bent by money and deceit. I met her at her old shop, now covered in dust with a "For Lease" sign. She wore a faded cardigan, her hands still carrying the scent of lavender. When I told her the foundation would cover all legal costs to restore her ownership, she didn't believe me. I had to show her the documents. Then she covered her face and cried, "I thought no one cared anymore," she said through tears. "But you came, and you understand." We worked with a team of young attorneys in Spokane, and after 4 months, the court officially voided the false filing and returned her shop. When she reopened, the sign, "Turner's Flowers," lit up again. The local paper wrote, "A small miracle on Main Street." I didn't need the article. Watching her arrange the first bouquet of lavender, the same flower tied to Melissa and everything I'd lost, was enough to tell me I was on the right path. 3 months later, the Warren Integrity Foundation hosted a small gala. No flashes, no cameras, just 20 people. Those we'd helped, donors, and volunteer lawyers. I didn't give a speech. I simply sat at the back table, listening to Gloria share her story in a raspy but radiant voice. When she held the microphone, tears rolled down her cheeks onto the bouquet of purple lavender in her hands. What I saw wasn't just healed pain, it was gratitude turned into faith. A young reporter asked why I chose the word integrity instead of justice. I smiled and said softly, "Because justice is what society demands, but integrity is what we keep ourselves." When everyone left, I stayed alone in the hall. The glass light reflected off the brass plaque, engraved with a line Robert and I once agreed on, "Justice doesn't shout, it arrives." Beneath it, I had added a small line myself with a laser engraver, and once it arrives, let it grow. I left the hall after dark. The streets glistened after a light rain, neon from a cafe across the road spilling purple across the wet pavement. I thought of my grandfather's blue notebook, the faded words, "If you are reading this, it means the Warren family has fallen again. Don't fear that." He had planted a seed in 1951, and it had taken a century to bloom. I stopped by the curb, inhaling deeply, the sea breeze from Elliott Bay carrying the smell of iron, salt, and a trace of lavender from the bouquet Gloria had given me before she left. Inside me, there was a strange calm, not the satisfaction of vengeance fulfilled, but the peace of someone who had finally turned pain into meaning. I looked out at the distance, where the bridge lights shimmered on the water like connected circuits. They shone, not because of power, but because they were built right. My grandfather's seed has sprouted, and now it's my turn to sow. 2 years had passed since the final verdict. That summer, Seattle was radiant, the waters of Puget Sound reflecting sunlight like 1,000 tiny mirrors. Life, once thought to have closed in silence, opened again in a way I never expected, not through a new tech project, but through something far simpler, a law bearing my name. The Washington Digital Evidence Integrity Act, legislation requiring a 3-judge review for property rulings, valued at over $1 million, and mandatory digital forensics verification for all technological evidence. In June that year, inside the Washington state capitol, Governor Ellen Gardner signed into law the Warren Reform Act, a sweeping reform of property adjudication in high-value divorce cases. It mandated that any ruling involving assets exceeding $1 million be reviewed by an independent panel of 3 judges, and that every piece of technological evidence undergo certified forensic validation. No more would a forged email or tampered report destroy a person's dignity within hours. On the signing podium, Governor Gardner told the press, "This act is not about restoring wealth to one man. It exists to ensure that justice can no longer be controlled by keyboards and software. A man lost everything because he trusted the system, and then used his knowledge of technology to fix it. This law was born from real lessons. Justice cannot be programmed." I sat in the back row, silent. When her pen touched the paper, the sound was soft. Yet to me, it was the most beautiful I had heard since the strike of a gavel, long ago. After the ceremony, I skipped the reception. I drove back to Bainbridge Island, the place where everything began, where Melissa and I once married, where I once believed life would move in a straight line. I had repurchased the old house after the trustee finalized the transfer, but now it wasn't a fortress of memories. It was a home for peace. That night, I cooked. No chef, no perfection, just 3 people. Me, Clara, and Nathan. The kitchen glowed with warm yellow light. The scent of red wine mingled with garlic, onion, and salt carried in by the sea breeze through the open window. We cooked together, clumsy but happy. Creamy mushroom pasta, salad, and an old bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon I'd saved since my Warren Dynamics days. Clara set 3 crystal glasses on the table. Nathan poured the wine. When mine was full, I paused and looked at my daughter. She smiled, her eyes soft as waves. "I've never seen you smile like this, Dad," she said. I answered, "Maybe because tonight we don't have to prove anything. We just have to live." We raised our glasses. The faint clink echoed through the bay house, a small sound that traveled far. After dinner, I stepped onto the porch. The sun sank behind the Olympic Mountains, turning Bainbridge skies crimson. The air smelled of salt, resin, and faint ink from my study, where I kept the original draft of the act. Clara joined me, holding my grandfather Edward's old blue notebook. She opened it and read softly. "Bad men can take what they see, not what they don't believe. Exists." I smiled. He was right. They can steal property, reputation, even happiness. But they can't steal belief in justice if you keep it inside. Nathan came out, holding his half-empty glass. "I think Grandpa would be proud," he said. "He planted the seed, you watered it, and now there's an entire field called Warren." I placed a hand on his shoulder. That field belongs to all of us, because justice belongs to everyone. We sat there watching Bainbridge's water turn deep violet, shiplights shimmering like falling stars. In that moment, I heard the old rhythm, the tide's steady, patient beat, reminding me that everything in life, no matter how far it drifts, returns in its time. Justice, like the tide, always returns. I closed the window but left a small gap for the sea breeze to slip through. The scent of salt, ink, and home blended like an unspoken melody. I lifted my glass, took the last sip, and thought I hadn't just reclaimed justice. I had repaired the system that once took it from me. When the clock struck 9, I wrote a single clean line in my journal. Justice doesn't arrive in verdicts, it arrives in time. Then I shut the book and looked out the open window, where the Bainbridge waters shimmered under moonlight. If you've ever been betrayed, stripped of what was yours, or humiliated for being too kind, remember, justice doesn't always come with the sound of a gavel. Sometimes it comes later, through time, through truth, and through the quiet way you rise without needing witnesses. My story isn't just about a man who lost everything and got it back. It's about faith, that no matter how many manipulate, deceive, or forge, there will always be those who choose integrity, who choose silence but stand firm, and who act when the moment arrives. Because silence isn't weakness. Silence is the stage before justice speaks. And sometimes the most beautiful revenge is realizing you no longer need one. If you're hearing this and still believe that dignity never goes out of style, leave a single dot in the comments, just so I know you still believe in quiet justice. And if you want to hear more stories where silence becomes a weapon and kindness becomes victory, follow this channel. Turn on notifications because every week I'll share a new journey of justice. Justice doesn't shout, it arrives.